Hey gamers, Foxfire's here, and today I'm going to guide you through the first boss of the Highmaul raid dungeon, which is located in Western Nagrand. The Highmaul and Blackrock Foundry bosses each have a unique achievement. Once you've killed them all, you're awarded with the Glory of the Draenor Raider achievement that comes with a Gorestrider Grondling mount. Kargath Bladefist is the first boss you'll encounter, and I'll be covering the variations of the fight for the different difficulty modes, looking for raid, normal, heroic, and mythic. Kargath himself was a slave to the ogres, so desperate for freedom that he joins the gladiators in the Colosseum to win his freedom. Any gladiator who can kill 100 opponents in the ring is promised freedom. Kargath fought his way through each of the first 99 victories. For the last fight, he was given a broken blade and pitted against a superiorly geared opponent. Kargath uses his wit to blind his opponent by reflecting sunlight off of his broken blade to defeat him. However, Kargath wasn't given the freedom promised to him. Instead, the ogres chained him beneath the arena and left him there. But Kargath wasn't giving up yet. Using a rock, he managed to sever the hand bound by chains and lead a revolt against the ogres. Kargath's victory made him war chief of the newly formed Shattered Hand clan. It seems ironic, then, that we actually face Kargath in Highmaul in a Colosseum run by ogres. Players can take the lift beneath the arena and rise up into the Colosseum. Notable trash. There's only one trash pull before the boss, and this consists of Vul'gor and several Bladespire sorcerers. The Bladespire sorcerers have much less health than Vul'gor, and they cast Searing Armor on Vul'gor when they spawn, which reduces his damage taken by 30% per stack, so the objective is to kill the sorceress first, and then focus on Vul'gor when he's no longer affected by Searing Armor. He calls another set of sorcerers about every 70 seconds, so after you down the first pair, pay attention to when the next set comes. The sorcerers themselves cast Flame Bolt, which can be interrupted. Interruption causes the sorcerers to move so that they can be grouped up for cleave and AoE. They also have an uninterruptible Molten Bomb attack, which targets a random ranged player's location, dealing very heavy damage on impact and leaving behind a magma pool that continues to deal damage to players standing in it, so players need to move away quickly. Vul'gor himself has a cleave attack, so melee DPS needs to be careful and stay behind him. He also casts Earthbreaker, which creates a fissure on the ground that damages players standing in it. Stone Guards will also spawn, far away from the tanks, and will need to be taunted quickly in order to prevent them from attacking ranged DPS and healers. The raid should kill these Stone Guards with incidental cleave or multi-dot abilities, but focus needs to be primarily on the sorcerers and Vul'gor. And now tips and strategies for defeating Kargath Bladefist. Kargath is actually an interesting fight with fun mechanics that requires moderate coordination and alert spatial awareness. When you enter the Colosseum, take note of the surroundings. You'll see 4 skulls evenly spaced around the outside of the circular lift/platform that you rode up on. During the fight, 2 skulls at a time will activate and rise as pillars of flame with very large fire damage radius. Players caught within this radius when the pillar activates will be knocked back and take heavy fire damage. The pillars continuously spew flame jets, so any player entering the pillar's reach while active will also take heavy fire damage. Wedged in between the skulls on the ground are the tiger pits. If a player falls or is knocked into a tiger pit at any time, they are instantly killed by ravenous bloodmaw tigers. Combined with other knockback mechanics and raid damage mechanics that I'll discuss momentarily, this can make it increasingly difficult to sustain optimal raid positioning for ranged DPS and healers, especially as the difficulty scales up to Mythic. The first boss mechanic to know is Chain Hurl. Throughout the encounter, Kargath will use the Chain Hurl ability to knock players back, and then pick up the 5 nearest players and fling them into the stands of the Colosseum, where they fight enemies in the audience. Once in the stands, these 5 players should focus on killing Iron Bombers and Drunken Bilge Slingers, because these mobs throw iron bombs and mauling brews at players in the Colosseum, causing unpredictable raid damage. Iron bombs inflict more than 19k fire damage on impact, and an additional 7+ k fire damage every 2 seconds for 10 seconds. Mauling Brew does more than 44k nature damage on impact and leaves a pool that inflicts an additional 44k nature damage every 1 second for 30 seconds. So this is a pool that's going to stick around for a bit. The Chain Hurl crew should kill as many enemies as possible before the Highmaul sweeper knocks you out of the stands. Note that iron bombers will explode when they die, dealing firebomb damage to any nearby players, so you can avoid this by moving away. The drunken bilge slingers will stun players in front of them, typically the tank, with vile breath. Also, iron grunts will slow players by using grapple. So as you can imagine, it's very important that before the beginning of the encounter, 1 tank, 1 healer, and 3 DPS, ideally with strong AoE, be assigned to Chain Hurl duty. After Chain Hurl's knockback mechanic, these players must rush back in to ensure that they are the closest to Kargath than any other player. Likewise, all other players must stay back until the 5 players have been tossed into the stands. The second mechanic to know is Berserker Rush. Kargath randomly targets a ranged DPS or healer to fixate on, chasing them for 20 seconds and slashing his weapons wildly in front of him. Any player caught in the path of Berserker Rush, including the fixated target, will take near-lethal to lethal damage. Kargath gains both a damage buff and a movement speed buff every 2 seconds that Berserker Rush continues. It can only be stopped by the target's death or by kiting Kargath through an active flame pillar that is spewing flame jet. Remember, while there are 4 flame pillars, only 2 will be active at any time. That means that as Kargath readies to do Berserker Rush, all ranged DPS and healers must be positioned close enough to a flame pillar that they can kite Kargath into it before he reaches them. And players not fixated upon must instantly flee the path of the Berserker Rush kiter to avoid being killed. Remember, not to fall into or be knocked back into the tiger pits. Players must not use threat-dropping abilities like Greater Invisibility or Feigned Death when they're targeted by Berserker Rush. By doing this, Kargath will retarget someone else, probably turn around, and kill any melee DPS who are chasing after him. Note that kiting Kargath into a flame pillar causes it to despawn, whether he's currently using Berserker Rush or not. So 1, it's important for tanks to keep Kargath in the center of the platform, far away from the pillars to avoid accidentally despawning them and complicating the Berserker Rush kiting plan. And 2, the ranged DPS and healers must shift towards a different pillar when it activates. In Heroic and Mythic mode, if Kargath is at the center of the platform and fixates on a player, the player may not have time to run from an inactive skull to an active flame pillar before Kargath catches them, unless major movement enhancements are used. This can be challenging when ranged DPS must be spread out, not only to avoid multiple players from being hit by bombs and brews, but also to minimize raid damage from Blade Dance. For Blade Dance, Kargath rushes random targets every 2 seconds for 10 seconds, doing 50k physical damage to anyone within 7 yards. There isn't much room between the platform, active flame pillars, and tiger pits, so in kiting and shifting to a new flame pillar, positioning can be tricky. Lastly, for all the difficulty modes, tanks must tag team to manage a heavy damage attack called Impale, which occurs every 45 seconds and leaves behind a 75-second debuff, Open Wounds, that increases the damage of subsequent Impale attacks. Impale inflicts 53k physical damage every 1 second for 8 seconds, and each stack of Open Wounds increases the damage from Kargath's next Impale by 100% for the next minute and 25 seconds. There are some variations in the fight mechanics depending on the difficulty mode. Raid positioning is complicated in Mythic mode because the flame pillars gain the additional ability called Flame Gout, which spits flames at random players. This can be avoided if players move out of the targeting indicator quickly enough, but otherwise it'll deal moderate fire damage to random targets. This actually makes for a lot of raid damage when combined with Blade Dance and the damage caused by the audience in the stands. Additionally, the tigers will actually leave their pits and continuously fixate on players, much like Kargath does during Berserker. The tigers must be kited to a flame pillar, which will disorient them, and then they select a new target. So ranged DPS and healers must constantly be mindful of active pillars and be close enough to them to kite tigers or Kargath during Berserker Rush. Defeating this encounter in Mythic difficulty is heavily dependent upon gaining and maintaining high favor in order to beat Kargath's Enrage. The raid's favor with the audience, called Roar of the Crowd, is tracked by an alternate energy bar on each player's screen. When the raid reaches certain breakpoints of favor, players deal additional damage, up to 100% additional damage dealt with 100 favor. Favor can be gained in several ways, but the predominant method is to kite Kargath as long as possible during Berserker Rush, using movement enhancements. Favor can also be gained by kiting the tigers through flame jets and killing iron grunts in the audience. See the guide in the description down below for specifics on gaining and maintaining favor in mythic difficulty. Luckily, for the looking for raid difficulty mode, players don't have to worry about tigers at all because the pits are closed. And Chain Hurl automatically selects a tank, healer, and 3 DPS to ensure a balanced group is sent up into the stands. However, what this means for the looking for raid difficulty mode is that all players must be ready to perform Chain Hurl duty in the stands. In summary, 1. Stay back after Chain Hurl unless you are assigned to the duty. 2. Keep track of active flame pillars, position yourself near them, and be ready to kite. 3. Spread out to minimize raid damage. As always, thanks for watching. I'm Foxfires, and this has been a guide for Kargath Bladefist, the first boss of Highmaul in World of Warcraft, Warlords of Draenor.